And I want to start out with a story. Now, this story is based on a true story, happened many years ago in the state of Florida. This family bought a lake house, secluded away from civilization in the swamps of Florida. And they decided to raise their kids there and to enjoy the life that God had provided for them. And it was on this beautiful lake, this gorgeous house. And every morning that they would get up in the summer, the kids would go in the backyard to play, and mom would make breakfast, and they would all enjoy a great day together in the Sunshine State. And one morning, the littlest boy, he was 10 years old, wanted to go swimming in the lake, which was a very common experience for them. And so he asked his mom after breakfast, "Mom, can I go swim in the lake?" And she said, "Sure, but be careful." So she's washing dishes in the kitchen, looking out the back window. The kids are playing, and one of the sons is swimming in the lake. Well, he went to the little deck his father had built and jumped into the water and swam a little bit and came back. Swam again to a little bit further into the lake and came back. And the third time he went all the way out to the middle of the lake. At that moment, the mother noticed across the other side on the bank of the lake, there was something moving that looked a lot like an alligator. She'd never before seen a gator in the lake, and it frightened her. So she ran out of the kitchen door to the backyard, and she was screaming for her son to go back into the yard to safety. He couldn't understand what she was saying because he was so far away, so he just waved at her, and she screamed even louder. Finally, when he recognized the desperation in her voice, he began to swim toward the shore. About that moment, the alligator also noticed that he was swimming toward the shore, and he took off from the other bank. The boy swam as fast as he could, and the gator swam even faster. When he just reached the deck that he had jumped off from a few minutes earlier, his mom was there waiting. She reached her hand down into the water, and he reached his up into the air. And as she locked onto his arm to begin to pull him to safety, the gator locked onto his legs. The mother held on tight, and the gator held on even tighter. She would pull, and the gator would pull. She dug her nails into his arm, and she would pull, and the gator would pull. A neighbor down the street heard the commotion and came out to see what was going on. And he noticed what was happening, so he grabbed his gun and he ran down to the bank. And when he got in distance, he saw when the gator surfaced, he put a shot, and then two, and then finally a third into the back of the gator. And finally, the gator let go of the little boy and swam off. Where the mother pulled her son in, and to her horror, his legs were disfigured and maimed. In fact, they were just hanging to his body by a thread. She ran to the car and rushed him to the hospital, and he went into emergency surgery. And many, many hours later, the little boy, not only was his life saved, but the doctors were able to reattach his legs. Months and months of therapy went by. The little boy learned how to stand again, and then he had to learn how to walk again, and then to run, and eventually he learned how to swim again. More than a year had gone by, and life had returned to normal on the little lake house, and a big city newspaper heard the story of the mother who rescued her son from the mouth of a gator, and they sent one of their best reporters out to tell the story. So he came and met with the family, and the mom told her story, and the son told his, and the reporter was taking notes and was just amazed at the tale that he was hearing. And he asked the little boy, "Would you mind letting me look at the scars on your legs?" So the little boy rolled up his pant legs, and the scars were just unbelievable. It was more than what the reporter was prepared for. He was scarred beyond belief. And then the little boy did something unexpected. He also rolled up his shirt sleeves on both arms. And the reporter looked at the scars on his arms, which are just as bad, if not worse, than the scars on his legs. And the reporter asked the little boy, "Son, I'm confused. I thought that the gator bit on only your legs and not your arms." To which the little boy replied, "Oh, the gator bit only my legs. The scars you see on my arms, those are the ones that my mom made the day when she would not let me go." And when I heard that story, I thought about the love of God, and that some of the scars that we bear today are certainly from this world that we live in. But can I tell you that some of the deepest scars that you bear in life are made from when the Father would not let you go. He held on tight. And sometimes we blame God for our pain, and maybe it's not always misplaced, because many times the Father digs in deep with his love and holds on tight, and he refuses to let go. Today in this message, I want to talk to you about pain, the unexpected gift. Muhammad Ali, the former heavyweight champion of the world, said this when he worked out: "I don't even start counting my sit-ups until it hurts, because up until then, they don't count anyway." There's something about pain that becomes a transformational agent in our life. And no matter how much we attempt to avoid, escape, and deny pain, it is always there on the cusp waiting for us. See, I believe this, that transformation begins at the moment that you embrace pain. Transformation begins the moment that you embrace pain. Now that goes against common human intuition. And I understand that. We avoid it. We deny it. We run away from it. But transformation will never happen until you embrace it. I want to take you to Genesis today, chapter 3, verse 16 through 19, and pick up the story of the fall of man. After Adam and Eve had lost everything, fellowship with God, dominion over the earth, even in their own relationship, total loss, I want you to see the building blocks that God pointed out to them to begin the process of restoration. Let me read you these verses beginning with verse 16. To the woman, he said. Let me just point out this today, that God started with the woman. Whenever you want to do something great, you've got to start with the woman. Can I get an amen today? My daddy used to tell me, if mama's not happy, ain't nobody happy. That works in life. God started with the woman. To the woman, he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. Now notice this, in pain. Everybody say, in pain. Come on, say it again. Say, in pain. It's in pain that transformation happens. In pain, you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Verse 17. And then he gets to Adam. And to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Notice this next phrase, in pain. Everybody say in pain. In pain. You shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. And finally, verse 19. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Now, even though our normal human intuition is to avoid pain, let me just lay out a couple of thoughts to begin. When you cannot escape your pain, what do? Embrace it. When the pain is too great to bear, what do? Embrace it. When you do not understand your pain, what do? Embrace it. That goes against everything inside of you as a human being to embrace pain. I know, I understand, I'm with you, I'm in total agreement. I just also know that transformation never happens without pain. If God is giving you a painful assignment today, it's probably because he's interested in the transformation of your soul. And the sooner you embrace it and walk it out, the sooner the transformation begins. The longer you delay, the longer you wait for the transformation of your soul. Pastor referred to our church that we built twice now. We've had 2 10-year stints as pastors of the same church. My wife and I founded Journey with our kids in 1996 with 17 other people. Grew the church to almost 2,000 by 2005. So within 10 years, we grew from 17 to almost 2,000. On August 29th of 2005, everything in our life changed. You've heard that date many times, and I know you all are familiar with it living in Louisiana. That's the night that the Hurricane Katrina, came through New Orleans. The eye of the hurricane passed right over our church and leveled it to the ground. And in a moment, everything that we had built for 10 years was gone. But not just our church, our home, our children's schools, the streets of our town, even Walmart. How can you live without Walmart, right? You see, when we planted the church, it was long before all these great strategies of church planting existed. There's funding plans and launch teams and venue sites and equipment lists and all kind of great strategies for planting churches. We planted during the decade of harvest, where our church planting plan was move to a city and start a church, period. And so we did that. We sold everything we owned. We moved to a different city, and we started a church with just my wife, and our children together. We invested all of our own money, our retirement, our own life, everything we put into the planning of that church. And for 10 years, we went on this amazing ride. It seemed like everything we did was just blessed. We baptized almost 1,000 people, new converts, in the first 10 years. It was a move of God in our lives. We were blown away. And we thought that it was going to be a meteoric rise from then on. We had no idea what was lurking in the waters of the Gulf would change everything. The storm blew through, and what we'd built was gone in a day. And I remember the first day they allowed us back into the city, I walked into the parking lot of our shopping center-based church. And what was once a 40,000 square foot facility filled with life and thousands of people and changed destinies was gone. And I stood in about 6 inches of muck and mire looking at the ruins of our life, not just our church, but our life. And I stood there, Pastor Denny, that day, and I cried. The sound of the helicopters from the National Guard were overhead. The troops lined the streets to prevent looting. The smell of the stench of death and the swamp waters that covered the city. A 20-foot wall of water washed over the entire neighborhood where we had our church and destroyed everything in its wake. And I stood there that day. And the smell and the thoughts and the sounds and the brokenness was more than I could bear. I had a knot in my throat as big as a baseball. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't think. I couldn't talk. I remember praying, God, please just let me go. I've done what you asked me to do. You've taken it all away. Now would you just let me go? You know what God said to me that day? At that moment in that parking lot, he said, absolutely nothing. You ever been there where you poured your heart out to God and God says nothing? I want to just remind you today that just because he's not talking doesn't mean he's not saying anything to you. That moment would turn out to be the greatest revelation of my life. The silence of God filled the caverns of my soul for a decade to come. I walked into that destroyed shopping center. I thought for the last time the roof was blown open, the walls were cracked, the doors were missing, the windows were falling out. I wanted to walk through one last time. Everything in sight was destroyed. We just bought a baby grand piano just not long before the storm, and it too was damaged and everything else in sight. And I stood there and I thought, God, I don't know if I can do this anymore. You ever felt like that? I think some of you have. God, I just don't think I can do this anymore. I can hear some of you saying it right now. You've prayed it last night. God, I just don't think I can do this anymore. I noticed down the hall, out of my peripheral vision, there was something hanging that had survived the storm. I ran to it, and I wanted to get a memento from the storm. And I was thinking, I don't know what could have survived this 100-mile-an-hour hurricane that blew off a roof that was 3 foot thick, but I wanted whatever it was. So I reached to grab it, and I thought it was going to be screwed into the concrete. The story is told in depth in this book. When I got my fingers behind it, it was hanging by a nail on a simple wire from the picture, and I thought, what in the world could this be? It was too dark in the room to see what it was, so I ran across the lobby, slopping through the animals that had died, the fish and the snakes and the life from the swamp that had wound up inside the building. I got into the parking lot in the bright September sun, and I held it up, and it was a framed copy of our dream that we had written 10 years earlier. The only thing that survived the storm was our dream. I fell on my knees in the parking lot and I read it out loud to myself and to the world and to God. And I read it again. And at the moment I finished reading it, I heard the sweet voice of the Holy Ghost. And this is what he said. I let her take everything from you, Doug. But I wouldn't let her take your dream. Let me just remind you today, if you're in the midst of pain and loss and you don't know how you're going to get through tomorrow, can I just remind you that God is a protector of dreams? He's a defender. And he may not use the path that you would have chosen, but he'll use the right path. It may not happen in the time that you would have liked, but he'll come at the right time. It may not be in the way that you thought it was going to be, but it will be in the perfect way. Our church was homeless for 33 months. I wish I could tell you the next Sunday it was all fixed and done and we were back meeting. We did not have that quite of an easy row. We met in 18 different locations over the next 33 months, trying to regather the fragments of our church. We didn't know where we'd meet one Sunday to the next. It became a running joke inside the church. We are the church for smart people, because only smart people can figure out where we're going to meet next Sunday, because we didn't even know. In those 33 months, I had a stroke. The stress was just so great. I had a stroke that left me partially blind, turned into macular degeneration, and the doctor said, I've never seen such a case to be so severe, such a man at your age. I was only 43 at the time. He said, you'll be blind by the time you're 50. And he was right. I slowly went blind. I can't tell you the number of times I asked God to heal me. I kept telling God, you want me to rebuild this church? I will, but come on, Lord, I need to be able to see. He didn't think that was an important detail. Isn't it amazing the things that we think are important that God doesn't always agree? My sight decreased to the point where I failed a driving test. I was unable to drive any longer. I felt less than a man. I was embarrassed. I was kind of mad. I was disappointed. My wife was a steadfast rock. She prayed for me every day. She spoke faith over me every day. For 7 years. 7 years. The doctor told me, Doug, by the time you're 50, prepare to be blind, or at least functionally blind. So we braced for the worst. But God had a different ending in mind. Let me just tell you this. God has a different ending in mind for you. In January, we went on a fast. 7 years after the storm, I went on a fast. I woke up one morning and the 11th day of a 21-day fast. I woke up and I could see clearly. I thought I was dreaming. I went to the window and I opened the curtain and I could see the trees and I could see the clouds and I could see the sky, and I thought, this must be a dream. I haven't seen clearly in 7 years. So I woke up Rachel and I said, Rachel, I have something to tell you. And it was real early in the morning. The sun had just come up. She says, Doug, this better be good. This better be real good. I said, I can see. And she said, you said, what? I said, I can see. I don't know why God waited 7 years. I went totally blind. And then one day God decided it's over. Along the way, I think when we embrace the pain and we surrender ourselves to the transformation of the cross, God does something that we never expect. Even when you've given up, you never give up on Him. Even when you have no more energy, you place your last iota on Him. I want to teach you a couple of things today out of these verses. Here are some things that are going to happen to you in your pain. In your pain, like the Lord promised Eve, and I want us to dig into this verse of what He said to Eve. In your pain, you will accomplish these 3 things. This is what God told Eve. A, you will create your greatest works in your pain. Think of it for a moment. Monet painted some of his greatest works while he was going blind as an artist. Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel 60 feet off the ground on his back in constant pain for months on end. Tom Dempsey was born with no right hand and half a right foot and played 11 years in the NFL and still holds the record tied for the longest field goal in NFL history. Dave Reaver, a great man of God, was burned beyond recognition in Vietnam by a grenade in 1969 and has spent the last nearly 50 years serving others while living in constant pain. You will create your greatest works of art while you are in your pain. Most people will never create it because they get distracted by the pain and they forget about the art. But just maybe that in the wisdom of God, He placed the pain in your life to be the catalyst for the art. We give birth to our greatest works in pain. The second thing that you will discover, like Eve did, you will discover who you are. In the midst of your pain, you will get a self-revelation about what makes you tick. You will see yourself for who you really are and what really drives you. You'll decide you love some things about you and you despise some things about you, but you will get to know the real you. You will discover who you are, and finally, you will move into your rightful place. See, this happens in pain. It's the great clarifier. It's the great equalizer. And while we're busy ignoring, avoiding, and trying to get away from our pain, it's there constantly as a teacher telling us who we are and what is our rightful place. Here's the last thing I want to tell you, and it's the lesson that the Lord promised Adam. In your pain, like the Lord promised Adam, you will reclaim these 3 things. The 3 things that Adam was allowed to reclaim is also yours to reclaim. It's what mankind lost in the garden, and it's what he will reclaim in his pain. The first thing you'll reclaim is you will reclaim your proper authority. There's nothing like pain to make you appreciate influence and power. The power cannot be trusted into the untried. They will always abuse it. Power should only be entrusted to those who have paid the price of pain. When it's born in pain, then authority can be rightly balanced in the hands of that man. For he understands the true purpose of authority. It's not for self, it's for others, and it's for Christ. The second thing you'll reclaim in your pain is your ability to create wealth. We live in a society that is driven by wealth. We live in the most prosperous nation on the planet. You and I have the great privilege to live in this amazing country. All of you have won the lottery. You were born in the United States of America. People from around the globe, there's 7 billion other people who are anxious to get inside these walls. You know why? Because God has unleashed this ability to create wealth here. It's not because we're smart or because we have found the secret. It's because this nation was built upon the reclamation of the rightful order of things. Wealth is relative. Whether you're worth a dollar or a million or a billion. Wealth in the third world is fresh drinking water. Wealth in America is $1 billion trust fund. It's all relative. God's not impressed with wealth. God is so wealthy that he paves his streets with gold. Think about that. When you get to New Jerusalem, the heavenly city, gold is a lot like concrete. Remember the guy that showed up to heaven with 2 buckets of gold? And St. Peter asked him, this is not really good theology, so don't really build your life around this. But St. Peter asked him, son, what you got there? He said, Peter, I brought 2 buckets of gold. He said, why would you bring pothole repair to heaven, son? He allows us to reclaim the ability to create wealth because then we know its true purpose. There's a great funding ability in the United States. Can I tell you why? Because this is the place where the gospel has been preached to the known world. The reason God has released wealth, the reason God has blessed some of you with great wealth, because he has given you the gift of giving so that you can fund the gospel to go to the ends of the earth. The only thing that matters in eternity will be the souls that were won by the wealth of this world. The gospel is free, but ministry is very expensive. And God has given us the ability to reclaim wealth. And finally, you will reclaim your understanding of pleasure. This one probably deserves a sermon on its own. If a nation has ever lost its way, it's ours. We've been seduced by the goddess of pleasure. And pleasure in and of itself is not sin. In fact, God created pleasure. It was his idea. It was his plan. But in pain, we learn to appreciate the joys of pleasure. It brings balance and correction and healing into our life. I noticed that this is the year of discipleship. You know what the word discipleship means? Painful learning. What you learn in pain, you never forget. You never forget. I need to wrap this up. We have to go. My last thought, and then we're going to pray together. The greatest advice I've ever heard about pain was said in passing to me 30 years ago. You ever had a conversation with a friend, and that friend says something that you know is the voice of God? I was talking to a friend of mine. I was fresh out of Bible college, and he just made a passing statement to me. And this is what he said. He said, you know, we all have to learn how to process our pain at the cross. When he said it, everything else stopped. He kept talking, I think. The world kept spinning, I believe. I was just captured in that moment. Process your pain at the cross. What does that mean? What does that mean? It sounded right, and I wanted to do it, but I didn't quite have the revelation. So I said, what does it mean, God? What does it mean? And then Isaiah 53 began to help me to understand, and we're going to close with these verses. If somebody could come give us some music to pray to in a moment. Isaiah 53, verse 4 and 5. The pain that God gave you is a gift. And here's why. Because you can use it to exchange it for the joy that you get from Christ. Pain is the only payment he accepts. You exchange your sin for his righteousness. You exchange your disease for his healing. You exchange the lostness of your soul for the salvation of your eternity. And you exchange your pain for fellowship with him. Isaiah referred to him as the suffering servant. And this is what he wrote 900 years before Christ was born. This is what the prophet wrote about Jesus. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. You see, the Lord did not remove pain from the equation of human life, but he knew you couldn't carry it alone. So he made it the currency of transformation, so you could bring it to him. Don't carry your pain another day. It's not yours. Exchange it. He came to finish what you could not. Last verse, Philippians 3:10, the great apostle said this about pain: that I may know him in the power of his resurrection and in the fellowship of his pain, his suffering, being conformed to his death.
Thank you for joining us. We hope this message has equipped and encouraged you. For current events and other resources, visit ccpeople.com. And remember, the best is yet to come.